Well, welcome to the May 6th, the day after Cinco de Mayo, meeting of the Dewey Beach Climate Change Committee. Let's start by doing our Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States. Liberty and justice.
Order of business is adoption of the agenda, and that, let's do roll call. So roll call, just go around the table, mention your name so we know we have everyone listed.
Drew Martin.
Sally Silver.
Dave Davis.
Stacy Hanna.
Very good, that's 4, so we do have coverage. The adoption of the agenda, Kate, can you put that up so everyone can take a look, please? How smooth that new IT function is. Main points are to review the minutes, which we'll talk about in a minute, and then our action items are to essentially review the memo that was provided by Philip and Chase as a follow-up to our February 20th workshop that we held here. And we're going to really try to make some headway in digging into the various points that they raised and identify some of the follow-up items that we need to do. We'll talk a little bit more about general topic of resiliency for the town, and I guess we'll try to select the next meeting date, although we may have to do that by email correspondence to get everyone for checking. And can I have a motion to adopt the agenda as written?
I'll make a motion.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Good. Start. So the main order, I just mentioned to Kate, I didn't write up specific meeting minutes from the workshop from February 20th. I think what we'll do is use this memo that Chase and Philip provided as a very good overview of what we discussed in the meeting and the workshop, and we'll use that as our meeting minutes for February 20th. If hopefully everyone's had a chance to read that over, I think it's a really good recap. I was very impressed with the way Philip conducted the meeting, and I think we got some really good information as a starting point for really starting to move forward. He has a focus more on the kinds of things that we can implement from a policy standpoint rather than try to, boil the ocean of all the different things that, we might try to do otherwise. And it seems like a good approach following kind of the Lewis model of how they approached everything. So I hope everyone's had a chance to not only read over this if you weren't in attendance, but also to go back and listen to the recording, which has been out on YouTube since shortly after the 20th. And the main order of business here is to kind of dig in and try to characterize some of the topics that we agreed to move forward with. Before we continue with that, do we have any public comments that anybody in the queue? Okay, good, that's easy. This may be a very quick meeting. First, let me go back, I made some notes here, let me refer to these. So the first topic that we agreed to carry forward relates to the Freeboard. And Gary, I think you noted, also President, of course, Gary Persinger, and Town Manager. Gary noted, the 1 foot implications or raising that are largely related to things like, the ultimate height limit that a building can have, right? And then when substantial damage has occurred in a structure and it needs to be brought up to code at that point. And so that could create some difficulties for that. The way this is organized, it's got 4 categories, and I don't know that we necessarily need to try to fill in each box today, but at least I'd like to have us have some discussion about what we think are the key action points that would need to be taken. is it to refer to a different committee or to the, to the council for their further consideration and then bounce back? Or are there things that we can agree to do that move the ball forward on any of these? So let's first talk about increasing the freeboard. I think we know that there are major implications to, we have to have planning and zoning pick that one up and take the ball and do one, and it's been on the list for quite a while. Any thoughts or ideas in terms of, other than referring it out to the Planning and Zoning Committee or Commission, what other things we would consider in looking at increasing freeboard? Any thoughts?
I have a question. So in our previous discussion with them, they said that, or we said that the current freeboard is at 12 inches in Dewey.
Yeah.
And then it should be increased to the, but how do we know that number?
Is that the,
About it in the context of the 100-year floodplain. That may have been mentioned at the workshop, but we just have generally been talking about, do we increase it by a foot? Do we increase it by 2 feet? And we did have a little bit of discussion at the last town council meeting in the context of the new town hall. And I think there was some discussion that we really ought to plan on an increase in freeboard before we really finalize the design for the new town hall.
that's just your,
Disagree, but it does have to go through planning and zoning, right?
right. So as the action point from that discussion in the meeting for the new town hall, you would ask planning and zoning to take a look at that and identify what the issues and constraints are for, raising it?
And cost?
Yeah, that's one possibility. We have been talking.
Factor you should consider.
Yeah.
Right.
An architect, GMB, said they attended a recent meeting, federal government meeting. I don't know if it was FEMA or HUD, but they said the government is actually looking at increasing the height also.
County as a state?
As anybody in the floodplain
In
along
the
the East
floodplain,
Coast.
okay. Oh, with the,
Basic flood elevation?
Yes. We're talking anywhere from 2 to 3 feet.
For our discussions last time that we talked about existing structures being grandfathered, so it really only applies to new
right.
structures.
And those that are damaged, right, and have to be rebuilt.
So realistically, what is going to be the impact of that?
Well, you could imagine, go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, I'll just say the impact depends on property or conforming property. And I honestly, I don't remember off the top of my head exactly what the variations are, but I know when I was my first term as a commissioner, Courtney Reardon and I worked together to try to lay all that out. And I haven't gone back to dig that out, but there are, it does depend on whether you're conforming or not conforming as an existing property, and whether or not it's been substantially damaged already, in some flood event, fire or something like that. Value of the property, then you're required, I think, to elevate at that point. Someone really needs to do a very careful review of Section 101 of the Town Code, because that's where all the flood ordinances are.
Yeah, that 50% rule is becoming a big issue in Florida after Ian.
Yeah.
Because there's so many houses down there that are over, the damage in that house is over 50% of the appraised value of the structure. It's just the structure, it's not the property and the building, it's just the structure. And so the people are forced to either raise it or knock it down. Eventually, that's gonna happen here when we get a major hurricane and major damage. Flood insurance, that if they go to renovate their, then they're gonna get stuck.
Yeah.
It's really, most people aren't aware of it. And I really believe that realtors, when they're selling houses at this point, should be making people aware of that problem. I don't think they will, but they should be making people aware of that, because all of a sudden you buy a house and you think, oh, I have flood insurance, I'm fine. Well, yeah.
That's actually one of the points further down that arose out of the one other facet, and I can't remember who brought this up in the workshop, but, raising the structure is great for the structure, safety itself, but it doesn't affect your access to the property, right? If you still have to be able to drive through standing water, you've still got an issue on access. So I guess it would be appropriate for us to consider making a recommendation to council and, to please, refer this issue with some priority. I think we all agree that, it's going to be a topic of discussion, and we'll just add our emphasis to it from a priority standpoint and say, we've all agreed that this needs to be handled relatively soon. Let's, agree that it's time to push it forward.
A hurricane is just one issue. Another issue is a stalled nor'easter right off the coast. And we've got a lot of flood damage, and there's probably a greater likelihood of that than there is a hurricane.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thankfully, we've had our work, the worst floods we've had have been nor'easters.
Imagine the pushback by the public is going to be, more related to not so much new construction because it can be factored into new plans, but the, rehab should a 50% or more, cost be warranted in bringing that up. That's, going to really, it has value, obviously, for, anyone in the floodplain, has a cost to the town, I guess, of, whether or not we choose to help out the property owners in the event of floods going forward. And that's another topic we'll talk about later. Public acceptance would be, not a terrible hurdle to overcome, the frequency that it happens and the number of folks that it could impact, but of disclosures made and, some kind of sessions held to, gain public input. Anything else on increasing the freeboard? Okay. Next is the VE zone, which is the flood hazard zone.
Oh, can I ask one quick question on Lisa Freeman? Has the town also, if they're increasing the distance, you have to raise it, are they also going to increase the height they're going to allow of the
No. Never go, 35 foot is still the,
Well, it's in the flood zone, it's 32 feet above the base flood elevation plus.
You always have the option to go to the Board of Adjustment if you got to show the hardship of that, but that would be the only way right now that you'd be able to do that, correct, Gary? Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that there was discussions about that, of raising the height limit based on the fact that you had to build a house. Curious.
so if you do that formula, you just cite it, right? Take the base level and,
It's base flood elevation plus freeboard.
Yep.
And you can go 32 feet from
32 feet, which is right now would be 3 feet is expected for that base, the lower end. So 35 feet is currently what, is the norm there? Right,
there.
it just
I don't know
varies.
if there is any. Again, it applies just to the flood zone. It's 35 feet.
Just for, okay. Oh, I see,
And
okay.
it's, and 35 feet is going to be the
Of the road,
Yeah,
yep.
the road out front.
Got it. All right, the second one, the VE zone regulations. I didn't have a chance to go back and read, the code language to say, but we know that the VE zone is, the flood hazard zone, and that it appears that there's some regulations that apply in that zone that don't necessarily apply in zone A, right? And so I guess the first step in that would be to see, look on a map to see what areas are affected by that, which are in A and which are in VE. And again, I mean, it's really something that's beyond our scope from a committee standpoint. I guess we'd have to just see if there was, I guess, again, planning and zoning would have to take that up.
should do is really try to understand what the differences are. If you look at, again, this is section 101, there are basically kind of 3 sections there. One, if you're in a flood zone, there are certain things that all properties are subject to, whether you're VE or A. And then there are 2 other sections, if you're in A zone, basically, not in the coastal high hazard zone, then there are certain things that you have to abide by rather. But then if you're in the VE zone, there's some additional things, some more restrictions that you're subject to. So I think, if somebody could create a matrix of what those differences are, because I think, if you're going to imposing VE zone regulations on all of the flood zones in Dewey Beach, you really should understand what the restrictions are. And just as an example, the two new properties where grotto was torn down and where they're building the new grotto, I think in both cases, they chose to take advantage of maintaining their buildings, their structures, but instead flood-proofing them. So you can do that in an A zone, but you can't do that in a VE zone. And that's only for commercial properties. If you're a residential property, anywhere in the flood zone, you have to elevate.
Gary, when you say flood-proof, what does that mean?
It's basically, you can build from ground level, but you have to, there are certain standards you have to meet for preventing water from entering. For example, if you've got a doorway, there are portable flood barriers that you can buy that somebody has to install if there's going to be a flood.
So they don't have floodgates on
Um,
them, on the building?
There might be some, I'm not sure exactly what else is necessary. But I think it's basically, you have to flood-proof it to keep water out of the property if you built on that first level. But that's only for,
Who is the flood administrator for the town?
So it'd be Dawn Hanks. And
It is Dawn.
And we probably should have had her here at the meeting. That was my fault for not inviting her.
Yeah.
I should have thought of that.
Well, we'll have plenty of opportunities for that. I think I just wanted to, get a read on the generalities of these issues right now, and then we can make some plans on when to invite people in different facets. Okay. Require freeboard in filled sites. I think what I made a note from the workshop is this may not just be one of those things that may not be currently stipulated in A zone, but it is in VE. So we'll get that in the matrix of the differences as we take that up and figure that out. But that is being done in the VE zone, is my understanding. Okay, improved landscape standards. We got into a bit of a discussion. We've had previous discussions, and in a prior workshop, we talked about the pervious paving and the different other facets that can be done, to remedy some of these situations or help streetscapes, things of that nature. There is part of a follow-up that I think we need to do with the Route 1 improvements that are planned on books. Is there a time frame for the Route 1?
So it's really not supposed to start till 2024, and it can run as late as 2028. Approximately $7 million may be set aside for that. They're looking for ideas from the town. And we've told them we want to continue the Center Island project, the Wave project, all the way to Collins Street and all the way up, probably to St. Louis Street in the north end, up in that area. That's one of the things we'd like to see them do. And that is a short-term goal, but they think they can turn around before 2025.
Okay.
They're also going to look at, for example, the garden that they put in front of the little store, which had to be done twice because of some of the runoff. They're also going to be looking at areas around town where they could put some of those in.
There's what you would call a streetscape kind of thing, where there's some kind of drainage provided for. Okay. So you're already in contact with DelDOT on those kinds of issues there.
So they came in and just did a really quick brief at our last commissioners meeting. They didn't get into the weeds. The Peter Haig, who oversees it for DelDOT, and then the contractor they've hired, they both came in and spoke briefly about it. We've met with them. Jim Didi and Dawn have met with them twice and given them our expectations of what we'd like to see. The telephone poles moved from the sidewalks and some things like that. Some of the sidewalks need to be repaired. Some of the driveway entrances that are no longer driveways, so fix the sidewalk so you don't go down and then come back up. Those are some of the things we're talking to them about.
And we have a pervious paving, strategy in place already for giving people some kind of guidance when they have a new, driveway that needs to be?
It's in code right now that it has to be pervious if they go to put in any type of new driveway on their property. Now, if it's asphalt and they are just going to repair it, they're allowed to do that. But if it's more than a certain percentage that has to be repaired, then they have to go back and, if they really want to do it, they have to make it, so pervious so the water's going through.
Got it.
All new construction has to have that.
Sounds like we're already doing, most of the things that have been cited and brought up as potential.
And Bill, that work that you did, was that McKinley, where you put the new parking area down that was, is a pervious surface?
Dagworthy Street,
Is it
the
Dagworthy?
north side of it.
I know we talked about the infrastructure. How's that, I mean? work pretty well?
Seems to drain well.
Yeah.
I haven't had any problems. Of course, when it rains hard, the water will build just a little bit, but within a couple hours, it drains very well off to the storm drain and goes out to the end of Dagsworthy Street. And that's one of the things, I've got a couple things, when you're ready, I could just talk about around town, but we can go through this list first.
Yeah, let's do that, and then you can give because then you can touch on all the different facets, that'd be great. Landscape standards, that's what we just finished. Wetland buffers. As I think was brought out in the workshop, most of them are owned by Denrec. Is it McKinley that's the exception to that rule? And one of the points taken was, some sort of buffer ordinance where it characterizes what they, they should do. So forth. Any inputs on that one?
So
Buffers?
we go to that list, I can update us on Center of the Inland Bays at Sunset Park for a living shoreline at the end of Dagsworthy Street. We can talk about that a little bit.
Right. Next one is stormwater utility. Again, it's, pervious surface, and, the description was a property, mixing it up with the stormwater reconstruction ordinance. Stormwater utility based on impervious surface and assessed would require feasibility. That was judged to be a fairly substantial effort, require feasibility studies and so forth. Anybody have any thoughts or issues with that? Seems like it's more of a long-term possibility, but we'd have to characterize it better. Let me see if I can get any background on what that would consist of. Here's a big one. Create a resiliency fund. We've been talking for years, as long as I've been involved in town committees, about socking away money for, long-term situations related to sea level rise, climate change, et cetera. And, we've gone so far as to have discussions of various methods by which we would do that. Duplicate the beach tax for the, the bayside, things of that nature, set up a separate infrastructure fund, you name it. We won't go in that. But I think everyone generally accepts that there needs to be a resiliency fund. I know the town is still operating on a fairly healthy financial basis, and revenues have been strong. The resiliency fund, I think, is going to require a great more discussion and maybe a workshop dedicated just to that, to figure out, okay, here are the mechanics of how we would go about addressing something like that. I don't see anything that we can do to move the ball ahead other than characterize it. When I was leading the budget and finance, we had a series of discussions and came out with some recommendations of different ways to skin the cat on creating a resiliency fund for climate change, sea level rise. I think everyone accepts that it's needed. It's just a question of how we would implement it and what's needed to do. Does it have to go through legislature and get charter and code change, that sort of thing? Any thoughts on the resiliency fund that anybody wants to mention?
Just don't call it a tax.
Right.
You can call it an impact fee. Considering that the town has no tax and all the other beach communities do have a tax, I think to ask the property owners to contribute to help keep their property values up, I think that's a fair request.
And one thing that was brought up during the workshop that I think may ease that shock is there could be a component of that that helps homeowners in the recovery process. where we could provide, or the town could provide, some assistance for people who are affected, in terms of remediating, right? So that would help, loosen up some wallets, I guess, and the ability or willingness to spend some money on that.
I think it's important as long as it's not, people don't think it's going. Funds are going to be
Sure.
put toward, it's exactly what you say they're going to be put towards.
Yeah, it's a
I think
dedicated
people
purpose, right.
will be in favor of those things. It's just,
I think the beach replenishment tax, or whatever you want to call it, I think that's a good example on how you can set money aside, and I think there's over $5 million in that right now. So, I mean, it goes to show with, in the investment that beach replenishment's in is nothing risky at this time. It's a safe type of investment, not making much money, but it's not losing money.
Yeah. Yeah, to, doing something comparable for Bayside, basically, saying, that's take a while to build up the fund to any substantial amount, but of course it'll do it over time. That money could be well spent. Okay. Stormwater reconstruct ordinance. That was more related to, I think, what can be done in terms of rebuilding, right, for after storm damage. Go back and review that a little further and see what more details could be brought out from that. Anything on that anyone wants to contribute? All right, let's go for the last two here. Sea level rise disclosure for real estate transactions, what you talked about, Drew, and that's a pretty easy one for us to address. We could put something together and perhaps with the marketing committee, develop something that we could encourage the real estate people to incorporate into a packet of information given to prospective buyers. So I think that's one that we can act on pretty independently at this point and make some real progress, which also goes hand in hand with the public education campaign thought of, really letting people know. I think, we're all attuned to this because we have been talking about it and established a committee, but the general public, I think, is just sort of, everyone acknowledges that there's an issue, but I don't know that there's much, communication going out to identify, what the key elements are and, why it's important and what needs to be done. So again, I think we can start maybe with the help of the marketing committee. We can put something together that can be, a workshop for the public, a webinar, things of that nature, and, some educational information created along those lines. That seems like an easy go-to. By the way, that's one of the things that Philip had encouraged us to do. I think he said that Lewis started with about 9 topics, and they tried to whittle it down to, things that were manageable and they could take action on in the near term, and that ended up being just, 2 or 3 things. I think we'll take the same approach. There's a few here that stand out. These last 2, should be easy enough for us to tackle and at least put some good quality effort behind right now. The others, a lot of the others, really are going to take more involvement with the council, the other committees, and we need to establish sort of a plan for how to go about those. But these last 2, I think we can start to talk about, and maybe we'll make the one of the topics on the next meeting focus on those 2 and see if we can come up with some language that help in that regard.
Would you expect any pushback from homeowners on the disclosure of real estate transactions?
So Lewis started this about a year ago. And as of the last time I talked to their town manager, it still hadn't been completed and approved by the commissioners. But the biggest complaint from folks over there was the people came and looked at the house and it was fine. Then October rolled around, full moon, and some wind came up, like you see on your street at least once a month, and it floods. And the people that are buying those properties don't realize that. So Lewis is trying to address that by saying the real estate agents should let them know if there is flooding. I don't know if it's actually passed, but they had already started working with their town solicitor to try to put an ordinance in or a code in that they would have to disclose it.
As of that February 20th workshop, I think what Philip or Chase said was that after the legal version had been written, they wanted to go back and review it with the committee and I guess their council and make
I
sure.
can find out from the town manager if it's
Yeah.
actually passed or not.
And when it does, when we get down to, the final draft or the released version, we can ask them for a copy. I'm sure they'd be happy to share it with us. Let us take a look at how they've addressed that. Obviously, I guess you would only issue it to those properties in the floodplain, right? So not everybody who has to receive a copy, but yeah. The public education campaign, hear any thoughts that you folks have about different aspects of that, but both electronic version webinars and things, or scheduled meetings, written communications that can be distributed to all the property owners in town. I guess what we need to do is raise the profile of this issue so more people know about it, understand the implications, and make it easier for us to gain their acceptance and support. Right?
I think the key thing there is to convey the idea that this is for you. It's not something being imposed on you. It's for your benefit.
Sure. More proactive than reactive.
Right.
Yep. Stace, anything, thoughts? Okay, Bill, would you like to give us a recap of the things that you have in your list there? That sounds like a good next step.
Yeah, thanks, and I appreciate everybody taking time out of a Saturday to be here, so thank you. The mapping of the stormwater system from Rodney Street down to Collins Street has been completed. We're just waiting for our town engineer to provide that to us on a map and to tell us what pipes need to be relined, replaced, or not anything done at all. So we're waiting for that. Beach replenishment, as you know, has been pushed back because of this last weekend storm. It won't start here in Dewey Beach until about the 18th or 19th now. It'll start on Reed Street where the pipe is currently coming in, and it'll run north to about Sweet Street. That'll take about 6 to 8 days, depending on weather and how much sand they bring off the bottom from the barges. And then once that's done, then they will go from Reed Street down to Collins Street. They expect to be done somewhere around June 10th, all together with the project. They will not be working Saturday, Sunday, or Monday of Memorial Day weekend. They will not be. They will work Friday afternoon of Memorial Day coming up to it. And this is 24/7 when they are working, though. They work around the clock on this.
Only from Reed to Collins, though? That's the extent of the replenishment, or is it all
So from Reed to Swedes, right?
sweet?
Swedes going north, and they'll do that first.
Okay.
Then they'll flip, turn the pipe, and then they'll do from Reed down to Collins, and then they'll finish the project. Senator Inland Bays, I met with them earlier this week. A Living Shoreline project, basically running from Bay Resorts property line in Sunset Park around to Ivy. Something like they did, but on a much larger scale, the Reed Street project, where they did a living shoreline down there, where they put plantings in and clams and oyster shells. A kayak launch area down there, working with DelDOT to fix the end of Dagsworthy Street and actually put like a berm in that they have on Reed Street. We're gonna have to meet with some of the property owners. Of course, the town has Sunset Park, DelDOT has the end of Dagsworthy Street. And then sometime in the future, we want to meet with Alex Pyrus and discuss in front of Ivy, right there. And of course, after that, it's the Lions Club and then all the way around to McKinley Street where there's the wetlands. But it's a very positive meeting. It's a 2 to 3 year project. They've got up to $500,000 that they'll be able to use on the project. And I believe it's going to really help the flooding at the end of that street and also some of the erosion that we're having down at the end of that street. Reed Street still continues to flood. We had some work done down there. We took out the controls that were inside a box at the end of the street. So what happens now is the water flows in, but it flows out, I believe, quicker than it did before. So we still have the street getting flooding when it's a high tide, but when it goes back out, the water is moving quickly off the street. From just a couple of the times since we've done it, it's flooded probably 3 times since in the last month. And I know Commissioner Persinger saw an email from one of the citizens on the street, and then I forwarded another email to them so they're aware.
Is there another level that's planned?
There is. So I've been working with the representative from Senator Coon's office. We wrote a proposal, and what we really tried to steer the proposal to was when it floods, it can flood all the way out to Route 1, which closes the road, which emergency response vehicles then have to go all the way down 24 to 113 to 26. So our proposal is to keep the water from going all the way out to Route 1. We've asked for $1.8 million in the proposal. It's already made it through the first phase. Senator Coon's office has agreed, and now it gets sent to a second phase. We may not see anything for 2 years. I did a letter to the Army Corps of Engineers asking them to also look at this. So if we do get the money, it'll be an Army Corps of Engineer supervised project with a private contractor that would come in. 2 years away, though. It goes through the process.
Is there a known solution that we think will help, alleviate the flooding on?
I mean, what we did with the 1.8 million was to have a very small pump station that would look something like we have down on Baird Avenue in Bellevue, but on a much smaller scale. There isn't as much water. The water comes from McKinley Street and comes all the way down to Reed Street and builds at the end there during the storms when there's a high tide. Whereas the pump station on Bellevue and Baird, the water runs all the way from Route 1 up at Pfeiffer's, all the way down that street. So there's a lot more water that comes there. So it would be a much smaller type of berm with a smaller type of pump station there that we would be looking at. And that's what we based the $1.8 million request on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bill. Last couple of items, and then we'll finish up for the day. One of the things that we've talked about for a while now is maybe plugging into the ACT process, right? Joining, meeting with those folks and having, I know there's regular scheduled meetings that, people from town attend, but I think it's probably a good time now for us to, make an appearance and, bring up the issue, if not already being discussed, about, Bayside flooding, and see what other partnerships we could establish. I know Charlie Garlow attended the workshop, and he's from Rehoboth, and he mentioned that, we're actually a little bit ahead of where they are. I was a little surprised to hear that. I think if we start having conversations with, the other coastal towns and see if there's a way that we can, come into some kind of partnership to help address these things. I think all the things we've seen in terms of the funding sources say, if you have, multiple municipalities getting together, seeking funds for a particular project, it's, stronger than individual towns doing it. So we'll have to figure out how best to address that. But I think, starting to communicate with ACT is probably, on this subject is probably a good time to start doing that.
So Mayor Stevens right now is the chair of ACT. We
Yes.
have our meetings here. We had our last meeting here just this past Thursday. The next meeting will be June 1st here
Okay.
at 1 o'clock.
Okay.
We had the Army Corps of Engineers on at the last meeting and provide a briefing to all the managers and the mayors that attended.
Mhm.
And they agreed. The Army Corps of Engineers said they'd be better is that as a group, the towns approach them and then break from there individually, because Dewey is different than Rehoboth, and South Bethany is different than Bethany and Fenwick, with the different challenges we have with flooding. So they are thinking about that. So it'd be a good idea, maybe June 1st.
Sure, attend and hear what they have to say. And anyone else from the committee who is able to attend, I think, the
Just-
more the barrier.
You need to just check with Mayor Stevens to make sure it's a public hearing
Sure.
for that.
And that's, you said 1 o'clock on the 1st?
Yes.
Okay. And after that, we can go see the Bacon Brothers that night. Okay, which I have tickets for. Okay, any more discussion topics, anything any of the members would like to bring up at this time? Okay. With that, I think we've pretty much fulfilled our agenda for today. Let's hold off trying to schedule the next meeting date. We'll probably shoot for something in July. I don't know how difficult that'll be, but we'll reach out because we're doing, trying to do about every other month at this point. So we'll see. And maybe in the meantime, we'll identify some action items and have some good meeting discussions in our next meeting. Okay, with no further business to attend to. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.